Our presenter today is Deepa. Deepa has over 15 years of research and experience in helping individuals and families navigate and manage significant life changes that have transformed the familial roles into those of primary caregivers. You guys know what I'm talking about. What started out as a passion project and life preserver while she navigated her own transforming role, she helps her clients understand the significance of their contribution, preserve their identity through upheaval and change, and create a path forward that restores balance and lessens caregiver fatigue and burnout. With her bachelor's degree in neuroscience and master's in international affairs with a particular focus on public health, she brings academic credentials coupled with real-world experiences to her sessions and workshops. You can find her on Instagram. She's tagged on our post today at the Purple Spaghetti Society, where she shares pieces of her own journey. For workshop info and her upcoming courses, find her at purplepivot.thinketh.com. I will post that in the chat because I know that I mispronounced it. So welcome, Deepa. We're so excited to have you. All right.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me. And you didn't butcher it because I think I don't know how to pronounce the last piece of that either. All right, so I'm gonna just start off with get into a little bit more of who I am and why am I here. So as you know, my name is Deepa. It's Deepa Narasimhan. And I mainly grew up in Canada with an overseas stint in my elementary years. We definitely moved around a lot, even when we were in the same province and city. And I think it was through that I found myself studying people and communities and how they interact at a very young age. I'd look to decode the language to make sense of the systems that made a particular community work or not work. And while this was in part survival, because we know how mean middle schoolers can be, it grew into a love of all things academic. I loved researching, writing, and studying, and basically all things navel gazing. So fast forward to my undergraduate years where I was studying to become a neuroscientist when I was swept off my feet literally by an officer and a gentleman. And he was in the US Navy. I married that man after I graduated. His deployments took him all over the world and took us all over the States. He loved his job. He got to work with the Navy SEALs. He had worldwide deployments. To working at the most high-profile clinic in stateside, and that was in DC. And while he was stationed there, surprise, surprise, I decided to go to grad school. I went to Georgetown, where I researched how culture influenced health behavior and outcomes. And I know that sounds boring, but it was so interesting to me. I could just eat up all of the books and all of the research that I was finding. So I went on to teach as a professor. It was my dream job, while still supporting my husband's active duty career and his medical trainings. It was really important to me, and it still is, that his inner flame was nurtured. After all, he and I connected over our larger than life dreams. Ambition to me is akin to hope and optimism, as well as intertwined with our personal identity. It shapes who you are. As a partner, I was committed to supporting his goals. In his case, it was actually the first step was multiple residencies across various states. So we kept moving. But here's where the tale gets a little heavy. Unfortunately, just as I was getting started in my career and my research was starting to get noticed, my husband's health began to fail. First, it was the tripping, then a rolled ankle, then that same rolled ankle that just wouldn't heal. It just kept getting weaker. Then it was weak grip strength. And then it progressed to the inability to use his fingers. And then finally to the inability to raise his arm on one side. It was happening in slow motion over 2 years. And though we saw it happening, we stayed hopeful. Some say denial, but we could always find an explanation. Finally, during his fellowship, he was diagnosed with lesions on his spinal cord and brain. And the cause? Likely exposures during his time in service. But it didn't really matter what the cause was or why. All we knew is that he couldn't operate, he couldn't deploy, he couldn't do any of the things he loved, like run his marathons and continue on to other triathlons. He was heat intolerant and he was going through flare after flare. And the worst of all, the worst part about it was that when our girls came along, he wasn't able to hold them as newborns or run and play with them today. Life throws us gut punches, but the pain of that felt, and it still feels, endless at times. We were just starting our lives, yet we had nothing in common with our peers. Shortly after his diagnosis, we moved to the West Coast, and that was his last duty station. With a newborn in tow, leaving my promising career in academia, my research cut short, away from my entire support system, and the weight of taking on the majority of home and childcare duties out of necessity. And it was actually, if I think back, it was the mark of that transition from my role as wife to wife and support caregiver. So remember that part about his inner flame that I talked about? That star that I could and still can see in him? Somehow I lost sight of the balance of and also, that I could support his dreams and also support mine. Somewhere in that time, my identity was wholly swallowed up in caregiving support, whether it be to my husband or to my children. So while I didn't have the tools at that time to find the path back to myself, I did recognize that I had two choices. The first would scream out to me in my weakest moments, and it was to just wave that white flag in defeat and just exist, just get through this life. But the second would whisper to me as I lost pieces of myself, bit by bit, and it would urge me to not only navigate this new normal that's ever changing, and I know that many of you understand that, but that I could thrive while I was doing that. I realized that part of thriving is developing resilience. And in order to develop resilience, we needed to learn to deconstruct our caregiving experiences to identify those opportunities. So here's the thing. I firmly believe that hard road with all the bumps and bruises is where the magic lies. What I'm about to share with you is what worked for me. It's not a black and white process. All of us have very real circumstances with competing priorities. This isn't a workshop about drawing hard lines or hard boundaries. My goal is to help you navigate within your circumstances in a way that resonates with you. I'm simply sharing a part of my roadmap that helped me get my head above water and lead me back to myself, and in turn help with my own burnout. And one more thing, I'm nowhere near the finish line, but I don't think I'd be useful if I was sharing my story once I hit my goal, because honestly, I was tired of hearing from people who had it all figured out. They forgot about the small bumps in the road that were massive stumbling blocks for someone like me at the first mile marker. I wanted the blueprint in real time as it was being marked up to show me where the stones were, what to avoid, what to face. I wanted that process in real time because that's where the magic is. I'm in the trenches with you, but just maybe 250 yards ahead. And if my story, and I should probably back up, I'm actually an intensely private person. But if my story resonates with just one person or benefits just anyone, someone, then it was worth stepping out of that shell. It was worth sharing the story. All right, so I don't know about you, but that felt really heavy. So I'm going to take this back a bit and reset the workshop. So we know how easy it is to lose yourself when the demands of caregiving become overwhelming. And it doesn't matter what the actual demands are. It could be caring for an aging parent, a chronically sick spouse, children with competing needs, mental health challenges, or caring for loved ones with COVID, long COVID. The demanding nature of this role, combined with the constant overwhelm that often results in that quiet loss of self. As caregivers, we are especially vulnerable to this, and it goes without saying that it's highly problematic. You might find that you are overcommitting. You have hazy executive functioning skills because you don't know what to prioritize. Brain fog, overpleasing, shape-shifting to fit others' expectations. And here are the more insidious consequences of that quiet loss of self. Emotional burnout, physical burnout, resentment, compassion fatigue. For me, I found that on most days I was on autopilot, just doing, whether it be juggling the kids, homework, drop-off, pickups, the household because something was always breaking. And then it was also the the caregiving duties. It's the doctor's appointments and the scheduling and those medication refills with the prior authorizations. I feel so drained mentally, physically, emotionally. And I tried all the things. I tried the lists and the apps and this and the that, but I still felt so empty. And the worst part was at the end of the night, I didn't even have the energy to figure out why. But the why came to me on the normal, chaotic morning. So I actually had documented when this kind of epiphany came to me, what was happening in real time. And I'm going to read it because it is so chaotic to me that I have a hard time remembering it to tell you. So I was in the middle of dealing with a medication refill, and I just knew that it would have some roadblock with the prior authorization. And I was debating who to call first, the specialist, the pharmacist, the insurance company, who would have the least hold time. And I also needed to make dedicated time for meal prep for this complicated and time-consuming autoimmune diet I have my husband on. I was mentally prepping the 700 ingredients in my head while wondering, was it really helping? And also, will he actually eat his meals today, or will it come back uneaten because the clinic ordered out again? And then there was a pile of research papers examining the drug interactions and the side effects of the new medication that my husband was about to start. What were the long-term side effects? What were the short-term side effects? Did they interact with all the supplements that he was on? I needed to do some cross comparisons there. And speaking of which, how are the meds stored? When were they being delivered? Were they going to be sitting out in the sun? Do I need to coordinate a delivery time? Then there's all the stuff with my kids. I needed to read over, choose the days, double check my schedule, and register for multiple different activities for 2 kids, and make sure I didn't do it at the same time at 2 different parks. And then I had to schedule doctor's appointments for my children. One of them was a blood test. These blood tests, she's afraid of anything sharp. So I had to take into account the best time of day where it wouldn't take 3 hours. Do I do it at a lab, the pediatrician's office? Can we get numbing cream? Will they please sedate her? That would just make this so much easier. Did I even have time to make the call? I don't know about you, but that, even reliving that and telling you what it was like is like, that was a lot. And I think that it's a familiar story or some iteration of it for many of you. It's not so much what is happening on any given day, but it's the sheer task saturation. It surrounds us, it weighs us down, and it leads to these clouds of chaos. What doesn't get done one day gets tacked onto tomorrow's to-do list. But there's only 24 hours a day. How do you take 28 hours worth of tasks and jam it into 24 hours while still making time to pursue your ambitions, your dreams, your self-care, your rest, your health? The reality is you don't. All these tasks need to get done, some more urgent than others, and all of them require an action of some sort, a decision to be made. And as a primary caregiver, you find yourself making so many decisions. It's incredibly overwhelming, and it often falls squarely on you in the moment. The demand of constant decision-making, both unconscious and conscious, should not be underestimated. Keep in mind, it doesn't matter how small or simple those decisions may be. Your brain is constantly being taxed, and the payment for that tax is energy. The never-ending decision spiral and the resulting energy loss, to me, is not only a debilitating symptom, but also one of the root causes of that quiet loss of self. When your energy is drained and funneled externally, there's no time to focus on you. You're simply on autopilot. You're just existing. So great, we found the cause. It's going to be simple now to fix it. We just simply need to find a system to pull away the noise, make all our decisions, put those on autopilot so we can focus on ourselves, right? And we all know someone who's done this to us. You know someone who's come in and from the outside and said, you just need to prioritize better. You just need to throw out some of your to-do list. Not all of it's important. The problem is, as caregivers, with our brain in full survival mode, It's not so simple to just cross off items because it might actually have dire consequences. Everything needs to be prioritized until we are sure it doesn't matter. Some people can do this naturally in high stakes situations. Good for them. I'm not one of them. When you add to that the lack of sleep, no self-care, I mean, eating doesn't even make the to-do list because we just talked about prioritizing. What about that resentment for not being able to follow your dreams or even taking a shower when you want to? And it's closely followed up by the debilitating guilt for even thinking those thoughts. And let me tell you, I listen to more experts that I can count about life hacks and systems. I looked into every planner and I tried to find a system. I really did. But then choosing the system and planning the system and making the decision, analysis paralysis, and it was just boom, burnout. And I'm also willing to bet that your burnout isn't just from the many decisions and tasks that you contend with, but it's also the ability to see 1,000 different outcomes from the result of each one of those decisions. Many of us deal with high stakes decisions on any given day or even hour. Now, to be clear, I think this is an incredibly valuable skill, especially for a caregiver. But it is also draining when this skill is applied to every decision. And it's funny, I find that when I'm most burnt out, when I'm most frazzled, and in that survival mode, it's when I actually default to that decision-making process. And while all the solutions I keep coming up with are seemingly viable, it just creates so much noise. What I needed for myself was the fastest path to the best solution that worked for me. So I'm going to repeat that. What I needed was the fastest path to the best solution that worked for me. And here's where we come back full circle. I actually do get there. I get there. The way I was able to start reducing that burden of decision fatigue wasn't eliminating responsibilities or eliminating the task, creating hard boundaries, having a fancy app or planner, or even just hiding. It wasn't the external stuff. It was all internal. It was reconnecting to me, my identity, and who I am at my core. I'm just checking to see if we have any comments. I see the chat going, so there we go. And feel free, I will stop when I notice the screen. If anyone has any questions, to stop me. I've got so much to say, so please feel free. All right, so reconnecting to your identity. What does that even mean? Well, it's not as loosey-goosey as it sounds. Part of what made decision-making so hard for me was the expectations of from myself and from others that were superimposed on me. In other words, it was this perpetual conflict between how I thought I ought to be versus who I am. The 1,000 different outcomes resulted in the many voices being filtered through my decision funnel. Depending on which voice I listened to, it impacted the choices I made. The trick was being able to hone into my voice through the noise. When I was able to do this, more times than not, it left me with a decision quickly, with more confidence and less second guessing. So no big surprise, but it got me thinking and thinking and thinking and lots of navel gazing about the idea of hearing my voice in the middle of all of that noise. And it reminded me of this technical concept called signal to noise ratio. Some of you engineers out there might recognize this, and it applies broadly to our discussion today. The concept is exactly what it sounds like: filtering meaningful data, the signal, from the random, useless data, the noise. The noise is always competing to be heard, and it's sometimes far louder than the signal. Following this analogy, it started to make sense why I wasn't able to hear my own voice and ultimately lose that connection to myself. I couldn't separate the noise from the signal. But what was that noise? I needed to define what that was. I needed to define what wasn't my voice, what wasn't my signal, before I could define what was my voice. Well, I figured knowing yourself was the first step to that path of resilience. But then what? So brick by brick, I started paving a path for myself that kind of turned into this roadmap. And I'm just going to broadly describe it to you. There's 3 steps to it. The idea is that you need to know yourself, you need to know what matters, and you need to know your boundaries. The know yourself is actually hearing your voice and trusting your voice. And that's what we're going to get into today. But briefly, the other 2 steps build upon each other. So once you can hear your voice, you can find your foundation when you know what matters. You can drill down on your guiding principles. Again, it's much easier to find those when you can hear your own voice. You can identify your circles. I kind of look at these as tiers of importance, where you consciously choose who is prioritized. And in this way, your people pleasing is eliminated. And then you use those circles to guide your decisions. It'll act as a lighthouse. And like a beam, it'll focus your decisions based on your set priorities. Once you're aware of the values that speak to you, it becomes easy to navigate boundaries, both creating them and removing them. So you need to know your boundaries. And doing that, you find your non-negotiables. You drill down on your triggers. You find self-care that actually works for you, not something that sounds good. And you compassionately declare your boundaries. So let's get back to that first piece. Trusting your voice. And to trust your voice, you need to be able to hear your voice. You need to be able to find your voice. So let's go back to that idea of decisions, because it ties into this. Bear with me. Most decisions we make are based on an inner set of criteria that we use consciously or subconsciously. That criteria is based on a set of values that we live our life by. They tell us a lot about what we hold sacred, what's important to us, what we prioritize, and how we want to live our life. And it's these core values that are incredibly important because they are the anchors that we come back to over and over again to help direct our lives, whether we realize it or not. We can also think of these core values as guides who direct our inner compass. The values themselves don't have the ultimate destination, but it helps direct our journey to where we need to be on our unique path at any given time. In a sense, they're like this mysterious guide at the side of the road who tells you to make a left at the fork instead of a right. And you don't know why, but you're trusting their words, and you just do it. In the same way, you have to know your core values so you can follow your direction for your unique path. So, and like I keep saying, that's easier said than done. So going back to the analogy of that mysterious guide at the side of the road, what if there are 10 of them, all whispering a different direction to you, telling you what you should do, who you should listen to, which road to take? The whispering can become deafening. And in the same way, when others' voices are superimposed on us, it distorts our direction. I refer to these whispers as the shoulds. You should do this because insert reasonable explanation, but also insert unreasonable expectation. All of these whispers tell us something that we should do or think or feel, but we don't always stop in that moment to see if they work for us, work for our unique compass. You need to know what voices are placed on you so you can reset and redirect your compass to clarity. Remember that mysterious guide at the side of the road? You know your guide when you can hear your voice in their whispered tones. Often, as caregivers, we're so desperate for that perceived normal. At least I was, and sometimes still am. And I'm so tired that I listen to the first voice that sounds reasonable in my mind. And here's a ready example that I think some of you can kind of empathize with. It's a new parent who's red-faced at the birthday party because it's their kid that's melting down, while everybody else's kid is happy and having fun and laughing. You need better boundaries, one person whispers. Another whispers, you need to throw them to the wolves. I mean, how will they navigate the world? They're already 3. Another says, you coddle them too much. And somewhere in those whispers, there's a calm voice that says, He's just overstimulated. His body processes things faster than others, and sometimes the input is too much. That's not a problem. That's just his gift, and it just needs to be nurtured. We become vulnerable to the opinions or lens in which others see us, that we can mistake it for our own. And because these voices filter in so much noise, we aren't able to distinguish our own voice from the others. And this makes decision-making that much harder and extremely energy consuming. So for us, the first step is hearing your voice. And the first step to hearing your voice is to start deconstructing the voices that your shoulds come through. And that's what we're going to do. So we're going to start an exercise, and hope everyone has paper. And Allison, I'm going to ask you if you can just let me know when everyone's ready, or is it Kina? Oh, I can't hear you.
Zoom bingo. That would have been the first one that we won. Yeah, if everyone could just grab a piece of paper and a pen, it can just be a scrap. We'll do this exercise. Thanks.
You can even do it in your head.
Yes.
It's all good. And feel free as we go through the questions to share either in the comments or if you want to speak, that would be great. So we can kind of open up the discussion. I feel like I just spoke, which I actually did. So it's not that I feel like it actually happened. All right. So the first exercise is the should from yourself, from your inner critic, from your mind, from your just whatever comes to you. I want you to do this quickly. When I ask the question, I want you to jot down the first things that come to you. So these are the shoulds from yourself and from your inner critic. What should the role of a caregiver look like? Just want to give everyone 20, 30 seconds. Get that out. What should the role of a caregiver look like? Think of feelings, think of events, words, values. Okay. Should I move on to the second question, or do we need a little more time?
I think we're good to move on.
All right. All right. Let's look at the shoulds from the other filter, from the shoulds from others, both indirectly and directly. So ask yourself the question, what do others think a caregiver should look like? Think of specific people in your life, or alternatively, listen closely for the known voices as you ask that question. So again, it's the feelings, could be words, could be actual events. Just jot them down as they come out, stream of consciousness. At the end of this, I'm going to share what happened when I did this exercise. Okay, and the third question is, this is where we're trying to find our signal, the shoulds that feel right. So when you look at the first two questions, when you look at the answers with the first two questions, you might start to see a reoccurring theme. It could be, again, the values, the judgments, the words, and the feelings that keep coming up. So try and highlight those and bring them down, because somewhere in there, we're going to try and discern your signal. And if anybody wants to start sharing what they're coming up with, we can do that first, or I can share what I found. Oh, I can't hear you.
Oh man.
It's all
Okay.
good.
I'll share what I put down, which was should a caregiver should be loving and dedicated in my mind. I think others believe that we should be in charge and handle all things. So to narrow that down, it's kind of we should do it all.
I like that. You know what I was also getting from there. So what was your first two again?
Should be loving and dedicated and should be in charge of all needs required of our loved one.
So it was almost like for you, it's compassion and dedication is it seems like that might be an emerging value, and being strong, being someone dependable.
Okay.
So those
Yeah,
might
I
be
like
some
that.
emerging values. Does anybody else want to share? I can share mine because I do a lot of talking.
And those joining us via Zoom, you are able to unmute yourself. So if you'd like to unmute and comment, please do.
All right, well, I'll go ahead and share. For me, the first thought that came to mind was selfless. And when I unpacked what that meant to me, I could quickly see that I conflated selfless and without self. And to me, that meant putting aside my needs completely in order to make sure the more urgent tasks are completed. Tend to the fire first. My unexamined subconscious thought that a caregiver should do everything to keep the wheels turning, even if it meant turning it myself. All healthy hands on deck. Not being clear on what selfless meant in the role of caregiver for myself unintentionally created that either or situation. My identity or yours. For me, that was eye-opening. The should from others. Again, for me, the reoccurring voice was the one that would whisper, your needs are not as urgent. Suck it up. Stop complaining about your lost dreams, even if you do it in your head, because at least you have your health. This voice was closely related in tone and sentiment to my own self-imposed without self. Having these whispers reinforced an unintentional guiding value. Love meant sacrificing yourself, but you can't lose yourself. There's a balance between selflessness and self-care. And it's a lesson that I'm continually working on. So clearly I had a theme going, and I decided to dig a bit deeper into the notion of selflessness and without self, as it had such a big impact on my worldview. And as uncomfortable as it was when I was unpacking it, other words started to tumble out. Words like service, compassion, empathy, community, the greater good. These were the whispers that were getting lost in the noise. What I began to see were my guiding principles. And I'm seeing the chat sort of go light up here. So I wanted to read some of these. See, Laura said she had a should from others come up, that a caregiver should be tired, meaning exhaustion is expected and not something you're allowed to complain about or want to change. That's really powerful. So don't complain about it. You know you're going to be tired. You know what you signed up for. Interesting. The should. Again.
Can you hear us? We're here at Lisa's. We have a few shoulds and a few shaking heads, and to the last comment as well. Gail, do you want to share? What was your thought on that?
Am I understanding her to say that she agrees with a comment that said you should expect to be this tired, so don't complain about it? Is that what the comment was? Is that what you agreed to?
Is that what
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Is that what we agreed to? Is that you should expect that you're going to be tired, so you just deal with it?
Yeah, that's the should. That's the should that seems to come through from others. You should, well, you know you're going to be tired. You should expect it.
But not necessarily accept it and be okay with it, but
But
that
it's the voice. Oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
Okay, can I ask, what was the first question? What was the first question you asked?
Oh, the very first question. It's what do you think a caregiver should look like? And it's what you think an ideal caregiver should look like. And that might even come from that, that inner critic voice,
Okay.
the one that's really hard on you.
Mine would be a helpful helper. Just a helpful helper. And then
Helpful.
yes. And then the second question was what?
Was what
It should be.
Others, to me, the people I hear, they think that I should be a sacrificial lamb with no desires and no life.
Yeah.
And that is not true. That is not true, because if I'm not taking care of me, there is nobody to take care of her.
Well said.
and so you're able to actually filter out that voice and recognize it when it pops up.
Oh, I recognize.
Do you
I'm
filter
sorry.
it, or do you let it manifest and frustrate you?
Oh, absolutely not.
Okay. So you have learned to filter it.
Yes, I have.
Good. Good for you. That's Miss Gail.
It's so easy
That's-
to be sidelines where you're not involved and second guess. And it's really hurtful when you're doing 24/7 exhausted and somebody comes in, let's say, you should have done this, you should have done that. Or, I don't see anything wrong with your mother. All those things are not helpful. And I think you have to have a rhino hide. So those things just bounce off of you and that you do not react like you want to, but tell them to go stay put, because they don't know. I mean, they don't understand. So if somebody has never done this, they don't have a clue of what a caregiver has to do.
Right.
But you ask another caregiver, then they may have some helpful hints so that you do take care of yourself.
And that's a really important point, that we have all of these voices that keep coming at us and telling us what we should prioritize. And it goes back to that, the idea of, well, you just need a system. You're just overwhelmed because you don't know what to prioritize. Well, I don't know what to prioritize because my day is so full. And I don't know if any of you feel that way too, that we can't also afford to just let stuff go. We've got to be on top of everything. And it's not so easy to just find a system to deal with it.
Deepa, I wanted to note that one of our attendees, Teresa, had said what she should do, according to herself, is keep everyone happy. And for others, which is always be available for whatever anyone else needs, and what she needs doesn't matter.
So then you want to figure out, what is your voice in that? What is your signal? Like the filters in that. What's your guiding values in that? And this is just one exercise. It's a very basic exercise. But maybe what are the themes that are coming up in there? Is it the idea of community? I'm reading what you wrote here, self-keep. So you're for yourself, keep everyone happy. So harmony and peace is very important to you. Being available, so that's dependable and reliable. So those are some guiding values I'm already seeing right there. And you can start discarding what doesn't fit. Because what you need does matter. It took me a long time to figure that piece out, that my needs mattered. And also, I kept doing the either or. It's either I take care of everyone else or I take care of myself. There was no, it seemed to be black and white, and it was so subconscious. It just sort of got in there because I didn't have time to just stop and just think, like, does this work for me? Do these voices work for me?
How did you overcome the feeling that that you're not doing what you should do, even though you're doing all you can? And people get wore out with that by slapping themselves, the caregivers slapping themselves, saying you should be doing better.
Yes. That's why I actually included the shoulds from yourself first, because I think I beat myself up more than all the others do. It's a continual process. I'm able to catch it while it's happening now. So as I'm sort of saying, oh God, I'm such a failure. Why didn't I just call in that refill? I should have done that. Then we wouldn't have been late on the medications. I catch myself. And I stop and I take a breath and I say, you know what, I'm doing the best I can. And look at this life that I'm living, and I'm living it well. And I'm going to look at some of the wins that I have. And that's how I can catch myself. But in terms of overcoming, I haven't completely overcome that. I still struggle with that. But at least being aware of it, I would say for years, I wasn't even aware that that was happening. The fact that I'm aware of it, and I want to be better. I want to reconnect with the things that make me happy. I couldn't even figure out what that was. If you talked to me a while ago, I didn't know. I didn't know what made me laugh, because it was just do. If I didn't do, I was failing. I don't know if that answered your question. I tend to go on tangents. Allison knows this.
One of the things we've talked, this is Marty, one of the things we've talked a lot about lately and saw this through the Alzheimer's Federation of America, I know Allison's familiar with it, is they were doing a campaign called #caregiver and. So you're a caregiver and you're blank. So if you think of your identity, what is your identity? Like, Bill, you might be #caregiver and salesman, right? Because you were in sales forever, or caregiver and grandfather to your grandchildren. So remembering that your hashtag is not just caregiver, right? That you do have your own specific identity, and that gets lost. And so I love what you're talking about as far as figuring out how to bring that back and look into that, because there is a lot of your own personal identity that needs to be remembered, you know, and it needs to be fed and thought about, because that is important of who you are and to give you that strength inside.
Then make time for it. You can't wait until you're under a 24/7 caregiver. You can't wait for an opportunity for you to take care of yourself. You have to plan it and then try to make other things change so you can put your plan in. I hear people on these support groups saying, well, somebody thinks that I ought to be doing all this with her, and I ought to be doing this, and I ought to be reading things, and you know, and I'm saying, wow, you're going to kill yourself. You have to look for those spaces. I know when my wife is sleeping, and she does a lot of sleeping now, I don't look for housework to do. I sit down, get my book, and I read, because that's what I like to do. So you have to make time and recognize you need that time. I'm also a grandfather. I don't want to give that up. So I have to make time. And now the way I've done that, after I learned that I needed to do that, is I have somebody helping me now in the house. And I never thought I would ever do that. But it has saved me from turning into something other than me.
Okay.
And I'm a very social person, and being home with someone that doesn't talk much anymore and all this was getting tough for me. And Now they got somebody coming in, and they're usually here from the morning, early afternoon. I'm always finding time and planning to do something out of the house, get out of that environment while there's someone there to look after Betty.
Good for you. Good for you. Hey, you?
I think in this very complex society of ours, we have lost the sense of simplicity.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, in a family, there might be children normally, there might be elders. The elders are going to be afflicted by some kind of complication, disease, as we call it. We have to take care of everybody, and everybody takes care of us indirectly. We even don't feel it. I give one example of mine. I was a working man and I was always very clock conscious. 8 hours, I'm tired. Am I really tired? No. Then I became a business owner and I work 24 hours and I'm not tired at all. You may pull me out and give me some job on day number 2 and I'm not tired. On day number 3, I'm not tired because it is my job. Who else is going to do it? The same thing is with the caretaker. If my wife or my spouse is not feeling well, who else is going to take care? I don't have any money to hire a professional. And what does a professional do? Professional doesn't do much. I know it from the nursing home experience. You keep on pressing the bell. There was nobody on the main desk who can come and help you.
Right. And I hear what you're saying. I think you can break it down to simplicity, right? And I do think, when you're in a family situation, a lot of people don't have family that are close by to help support in that. And what we have seen and what science shows is that the more care that caregiver has to provide, the more it depletes the caregiver, right? So in that sense, the statistics are outrageous of how many caregivers develop their own chronic illness and pass away or are sick because of the amount of care. And so I wish that, my whole family doesn't live here. So if I had, it would be hard and I might have to rely on outside care as well. But I wish it was more simple. I think we all wish it was more simple. So, and I think your perspective, Deepa, is excellent at looking at what we think we should do and what others think we should do. But yet the reality is it depends on where we're at and and how we process that has so much to do with it. And to remember what our and is, right? And we're a caregiver and what is that in our identity? You agree?
And how do we want to live? How do we want to navigate that caregiving life? I don't want to navigate it based on the other voices, all of these shoulds that don't fit with me, because I was doing that. And you lose the best parts of yourself. I'm a person who believes that I'm put in this life for a reason. There's a reason I have this. Maybe there's a gift that I have to share. Maybe there's a gift that my husband has to share, but there's a reason I'm here. When I start blunting those pieces because I'm trying to live up to standards and expectations that don't quite coincide with my compass, then I'm doing everyone a disservice, including my husband. I'm robbing us of what my journey should look like. Sounds a little woo, but that's something that I try and keep in the back of my mind.
Can you give us an update on how your husband's doing now?
So he never got back full function of his right side. He is able to work because and that comes at that steep sacrifice of me kind of holding it down here, but I think that that's central to his identity. You can't lose any more of it. But so he's still the smartest person I know. He's still got that star. He's still the brightest guy, and he's living his best life despite his diagnosis. But we're hoping that things have stopped. We haven't had any more flares for a little while, for a couple of years. So we're just, we're holding our breath for that to just kind of like, let's just recover the function that we can get back.
That's right. Good. Wow. Well, you have a whole team of supporters here for sure.
Thank you. I feel like I have so much to learn from all of you, and I love this community. I wish I had known about this community 15 years ago. Would have helped me. I would have gotten to this point a little bit faster, I think.
I think most of us could relate to that, what you just said. Marty said it's hard, to find help. But this place here probably has saved my insanity from not taking over me. Because for at least 2 years, I didn't know anything and I was doing everything wrong. The next 5 years, I'm coming here and I'm learning all this information that I wouldn't get anywhere else. Not only that, what's beautiful, the people you're talking to over here have all this empathy. They're not looking off and saying, hi, John, whatever they do. They really listen and then talk with you about it, or you can exchange ideas. And you said you wish you'd known it 15 years ago. We have heard that in these groups that have said, I wish I knew when my wife or my husband was alive, because I had to go through this journey on my own. I really understand what that means. And that's why I don't listen to anybody that has no knowledge. They just don't know what they're talking about. And I'm a rhino hide type person, so I just listen to them kind of like you do a leaky toilet. You can't do nothing about it, but just let them babble.
So you've learned to filter those voices out. I'm going to add that to my filter. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening. And thank you for welcoming me into this community. It's beautiful.